That like when you broke it out.
All right, so for the this time around, it's going to talk a little bit about the Matilda tool. So we just used it recently in the presentation for the style sheet injection, but it actually has a lot more vulnerabilities built into it. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it's up to an even 50 now. This is the home page of the tool. And so the first challenge, of course, would be installation. The way it's designed is you just download all the files. Windows users may prefer the zip file that's up on the SourceForge site, but it also has a Git repository as well in the SourceForge if you're using a Linux system, and that's probably quite a bit easier than dealing with the zip file. But either way is okay. This happens to be an Ubuntu system. So in this case, all you would do is either download the files via Git directly into your web server directory or unzip them into this directory. There's only one folder for the entire project, the Matilda folder. So if you can get that folder into the web server, you should be in good shape. In this case, I'm using the LAMP stack installed on Ubuntu, just the default version that you can get from a bunch of different sites, instructions on how to do that. For Windows 7, I've used the XAMPP stack, which is like the LAMP stack for Windows. And some other people have given me some feedback that they prefer the WAMP stack for their Windows installation. Both of them were easy. In either case, you install the program, the LAMP stack program, and then you drop this single folder into the directory appropriate for that installation. And once you get it installed, the home page will show, but it's going to give you a warning that it's not connected to the database. And there's a reset database button here that you would click to cause the database to be built. And while I'm on that topic, the reset database button will rebuild the database at any time. And essentially it just actually drops the database and then reconstructs it from scratch. So any data in there you would lose. It pre-populates the database with a lot of data on its own, but anything custom that you had added yourself would be gone. And the reason I have it set up that way is because sometimes you'll get into some good cross-site scripts that are pretty fun, and you start to realize that just about every single page you go to is infected with the scripts or multiple scripts, and it starts to make the site unusable. By just clicking that reset button, you'll have it back to the factory specs in just a couple seconds. So to get started, of course, we have the home page, and it has some articles on it that are posted just to kind of get you started. So you might want to click on the "What should I do?" and it'll sort of give you a walkthrough of the security modes and the Help Me button and the different kinds of hints. There's an entire paper published on the tool and its use in classroom environments and capture the flags and other use cases that you can download, and that's also linked here on the left. And then it also links off to the YouTube site for the project, which is the weaponized YouTube channel, and that has give or take probably 50 videos on web pen testing that most part are going to use Matilda as the example. And there's probably another 50 or so videos on just kind of random thoughts on pen testing, some stuff on Nmap, different workshops we've done with the ISSA, across a broad range of network pen testing topics that are not necessarily going to be focused on web. Each of the page will have one of these Help Me buttons. And so let's go to a page that's kind of interesting, like, let's see, I think this first one is. By interesting, I mean that has multiple vulnerabilities. So if we click the Help Me button, the system has a record of what vulnerabilities are located on each of the pages. So when you click the button, depending on what page you're on, it'll tell you what types of attacks you should try on that particular page. Now, if an attack is not listed, it doesn't necessarily mean that the page isn't vulnerable. It just means that I don't have it documented. And so if you find an extra attack on a page, let me know and I'll add it into the system. So this page has around 6 or so major things wrong with it and that you should try. Now, if you're not really sure where to start on a page as far as to start an attack, it's disabled by default because it can honestly be a little annoying. But if you show the pop-up hints, then what will happen is when you get the mouse close to an area that has the vulnerability, it'll pop a hint up that'll tell you about the most obvious vulnerability for that field. So this field happens to be vulnerable to cross-site scripting and some other things, but SQL injection is kind of the main point of this page. It's the main challenge that the page was built for. And then the other vulnerabilities were just added in for fun. So if we had the pop-up hints, it'll stop popping those up. And so it made a claim that this page is vulnerable to SQL injection, so you kind of start to work your normal process, fuzz the field with all kinds of different characters, see if you can get an error to occur. Eventually, when you finally get around to the single quote, you'll see that it causes an error. Now, the errors are designed to be very verbose. In fact, there's a whole class in the project that just does nothing but implement as much verbosity as is humanly possible to make what you're supposed to do next as obvious as possible. So in that way, it's kind of not very realistic, because good web applications are supposed to keep all the error information to themselves and just give you a friendly message on what action you should take next. But surprising how many sites actually kind of look like this anyway. So maybe it's not as unrealistic as it should be. Of course, once you get the error to occur, it'll do things like it'll tell you the query that you're supposed to inject. It'll give you the, in some cases, the field names, at least the table names, if nothing else. Here it gives you both. It tells you the table is accounts and the fields are username and password, at least the fields of interest anyway, and goes on with stack traces and other things like that. Some of the error messages that are in here may not necessarily be very useful to you, but they're interesting to certain scanners, and the site is also designed to be a target for web scanners. So we've used it to test scanners from like Burp Suite to see what it can find, and some enterprise scanners like App Scan and App Scanner, which are actually 2 different scanners, Web Inspect, things like that, to kind of test out enterprise grade scanners so that we have a kind of a neutral site to compare them against. Now, of course, those scanning companies will produce sites of their own for you to practice on as well. But there's a possibility that the sites may be biased towards those tools. It's nice to have a neutral platform. So once you, let's go ahead and finish the exercise. Once you figure out what it is you're supposed to do and kind of what to do, I think this page takes in a very traditional cross-site script, if I'm not mistaken. It's just the old, like single quote or something equals something comment field one. Oops, I think I didn't put the comment in there. Yep, trying to use something that's for sure true. So like here I've just picked 2 equals 2. I do not want the password remembered. Okay, there we go. And so you kind of work your way through the exercise, and then we eventually get to the conclusion where SQL injection dumps out that accounts table, and you can see that there's other problems like the passwords are not hashed, and go from there. There is a login page on the site, and the main point of the login page, other than to log in, is to give you the opportunity to look at some authentication and some authorization problems. So the page itself is vulnerable to cross-site scripting and SQL injection as well, some more traditional attacks. But not SQL injection to dump database information, but to allow you to bypass authentication via SQL injection. So you may get to a page, and even with the Help Me button, you're not exactly sure what to do, or even if you're sure what to do, you're not really positive on how to do it. There's a built-in tutorial system, and that's activated by clicking on Toggle Hints. And kind of like the Help Me button, each page has a record basically of what's wrong with it. And so I think there's around maybe 45 tutorials that are built into the system, give or take. But only the ones that are valid for that particular page will actually load. And it's dynamic, so as you go from page to page, the hints bar is going to reload with the articles that would be of interest to you on that particular page. So for example, if we click on the HTML injection hints, the tutorials are broken down more or less into kind of a summary of what the problem is, and then give you some clues on how you would discover that. So if you had approached this page blind, how would you have gone about figuring out that this page had an HTML injection vulnerability? Then of course it gets to everyone's favorite part, exploitation, and it'll give you a working example of an exploitation that'll work. And then finally, it's going to talk about some things specific to that attack, give you some examples that you can try, and often it'll talk about the defense itself at the bottom. In this case, HTML injection is easily defended with output encoding, so there's not a whole lot to say. But one of the things you'll notice is that there's a video section at the bottom of the tutorials, and if the site can reach YouTube, it does basically a curl and tries to go out to YouTube and see if it can get to the video or not. If it's successful, it'll embed the video itself right here into the page for you, and you can just click play and watch the video on the spot. If you cannot reach the network, like in this case where we're running this virtual machine isolated, it'll go ahead and embed a link to the site that you can click, or you can copy if you're like this, where you're offline. So let's see. Copy link, and then I think I'm connected to the internet over here, maybe. Maybe not. Oh, there we go. So anyway, it'll take you over to the video, and this one talks about introduction to HTML injection and so on. Oh, by the way, this is the YouTube channel that has all these videos. So there are a few, I guess you would call playlists here on the left. So the web application videos are mainly in this web application pen testing playlist, and then there's also ones on building a pen test lab for yourself that goes beyond web. And then we have some videos on Burp Suite and Nmap as well. The Nmap ones are mainly a workshop we did a couple years ago, Adrian and myself and Martin Boss, who talked about Nmap for a day, and Adrian was nice enough to record it all. So if you're interested in other topics, you might check that out as well. All right, so let's see. Let's go ahead and try a hint since we're in here. So you may run into problems like the field isn't big enough, and this is not a mistake. You're supposed to solve these challenges as you go through. So if you try to paste something into a field and the field's not big enough, or the field's disabled, or the field's hidden, perhaps some of the fields are actually hidden, like the hints themselves had in level 5, so you would have to figure out a way to re-enable them. These are all puzzles that are built into the tool, so you can go through and try to figure out some way to to fix it, so to speak. And so I think this one we would want to figure out what the problem is with that field. It looks like the max length is only 20, so change it to 9999 or just obliterate the max length attribute altogether, whatever you want to do. Make it feel bigger. All right, and then you go work through and try your injections and see if you can get them to work. So it looks like the site's doing a pretty good job of defending itself in this case. All right. There are different security levels. Right now, it's in security level 0, which is pretty weak. It's not completely and totally defenseless, but the defenses are going to be client-side controls and things like that, that not necessarily they're uncommon necessarily, but they can be circumvented for sure. There's absolutely no way the site's going to stop you if you're determined enough to go ahead and either use an interception proxy like Burp Suite, where you don't even have to use the browser at all, or if you just change the HTML around a little bit to suit your needs. So if I go into security level 1, it's still going to be completely bypassable, but there's probably going to be some extra client-side validations added in. Typically what it does is there's going to be JavaScript validation on a lot of the pages, a lot of the forms, and the JavaScript validation is going to do blacklist filtering. So it's going to look for certain characters to prevent you from entering in. And of course, it's trivial to defeat that. You can simply disable the JavaScript. You can rewrite it for that matter because it's running in your browser, so you have complete access to it. And then there's a security level 5. It does skip 2, 3, and 4 for kind of future expansion, if you will. And in theory, security level 5 is supposed to be secure. If you find a vulnerability in level 5, and people have, the idea is to let me know about it so I can fix it and try to make it secure, because we want security level 5 to work correctly, not work incorrectly. So sometimes it's easier to make the site secure than it is to actually put all these challenges in to make it insecure. It's kind of funny when you start to try to make the site hackable, it actually breaks it more easily. So in security level 5, give it your best shot. So like here, I think we had typed in a single quote earlier, and the JavaScript validation is kicking in. And even if you disabled that, some server-side validation should kick in as well. So let's see if we can find that JavaScript validation. Nope, it's not on the button. Maybe try to find the form. Oh, there it is. It's got a JavaScript function on submit of login form. So you'd have to go change that JavaScript or do something like return true here or whatever, just to get rid of the validation. And even then, even if you remove all the client-side filters, security level 5 is supposed to be secure because it has server-side defenses. That makes sense. We added an enforce SSL button. This causes the project to, at least in theory, only serve over HTTPS. And that was put in there to offer up the SSL strip challenge, where you want to machine in the middle the site and the server, or the browser and the server, and then you'll use SSL strip to remove the SSL protection from the site, even though it's in an enforce SSL mode. So that makes for some pretty good demos, and it's kind of fun to do. It's a neat little challenge. Also added in a log. A lot of the stuff you do on the various pages throughout the site, it's going to write that information down into the log. And the idea here is that you want to try to figure out what information gets logged. And so various things that you type into certain fields or forms across the site are going to end up over here in the log. So you would do the normal reconnaissance scanning activity, where you would make up a random number, or put in a phrase that means something to you, and put that into several different fields and then come over here to the login page and see if your injection shows up or not. Once you find a field that ends up in the log, then you would want to write a cross-site script to try to infect the administrator, who would come over here and look at the log. And so it's kind of a capture the flag type exercise. And then you can delete the logs once you infect them, because it does get annoying every time you visit it, cross-site scripts you, or you can just reset the database. And then the last button on the main menu bar is a captured data page. One of the things I wanted to do was build in some kind of capturing mechanism that if you could just get someone to visit this page, it would write down the information that was sent. So things like the URL, any cookies, which of course is the main thing you want to try to steal in this exercise anyway, and any post parameters and other information from the browser. And the reason is that in pen tests and stuff, sometimes it's kind of nice just to have a real quick page you can fire up, that if you can just somehow convince people to come over there and visit it, that you'll capture all that information. So if you visit the capture data page without the D, then it'll show you what got captured, and in this case it's a couple of cookies and some parameters. And you can go back to the view captured data page that we were just on, and you'll see that it gets logged in there for you. And these pages are even vulnerable themselves, at least until you go to security level 5. So you can have some fun with that as well. Now, to find the vulnerabilities by their name, you can use the menus on the left. So I have it organized by the OWASP top 10 of this year, which the 2013 version goes through 2016, so this menu will be good until next year in theory, assuming OWASP puts out the 2016 list. And it's got basically 10 categories, because it's OWASP top 10. Then within each category, so say we go down to cross-site scripting, there'll be the different types of that vulnerability. So for cross-site scripting, for example, we have reflective persistent DOM via different kinds of HTTP attributes, HTML5 storage and JSON injection and cookie injection, XML injection. And then of course we just talked about the path relative style sheets earlier. And then I've also added in some cross-site scripts that work very well with the Beef framework, because that's a super fun tool to play with for cross-site scripting. And so these pages all guarantee that they've got some cross-site scripts that play very friendly with that tool and the Beef hooks. These older menus here are the differences between the current OWASP top 10 and the OWASP top 10 from that year. So in 2010, there was a few things that fell off the list, as it were, and didn't make it into the 2013. So I leave just the differences behind and have done the same for 2007. Historically, you can go back and look at some of those vulnerabilities that still exist today. It's just that they're not relevant enough to make it into the top 10 list anymore. Certainly, there's a whole lot more web vulnerabilities than just 10. OWASP just lists the 10 that are most impactful in that 3-year period. And then the web services have been added in as well. Originally, it just added in a SOAP web service, and then actually expanded out to have command injection, SQL injection, and username enumeration in those web services. Added the username enumeration after talking with Tim Tomes, and he was explaining that he had written some scripts that he used in his classes, and I thought it'd be neat just to add them in here, kind of have one-stop shopping. Eventually, we added some RESTful services as well, and you can do SQL injection and username enumeration via these REST services. So there's a test page for those as well, and it'll give you the WSDL for the SOAP-based services so that you can load that into your favorite tool. A lot of people like to use SOAP UI or some other different tools, and they kind of need a WSDL to get that process going. So to make it as easy as possible, I've already added all that in. And then there's also some attacks that kind of don't really fit into the OWASP top 10 great. They kind of fit in there somewhere, but I've put a few of those down here at the bottom. HTML5 gets its own section because it's just really kind of neat right now. Everybody's hot on that, especially the JSON and the AJAX stuff. And then there's some items down here at the bottom that maybe just kind of didn't fit real well. So the unrestricted file upload was a request I got from someone off of I think they just sent an email in on the support request and said, hey, can you add this thing in? And so toss that in there. A lot of stuff doing with XML, and then based off of a talk that Adrian had done, added in local and remote file inclusion vulnerabilities into some pages, and also explain in those pages how to set up your server to make sure that it's actually vulnerable, because there's certain conditions that have to be met in order to get the remote file injection to work. And then of course, finally down at the bottom, there's a lot of documentation. Keep a change log going, but the installation instructions is probably of most interest, and then a listing of vulnerabilities. And so these are the current vulnerabilities that are in the system, and I went ahead and broke them down by page so that you could search for a vulnerability that you wanted to try, and then use this list to know what page it is you're supposed to go to in order to find that vulnerability. It's not kept quite as up to date as I would like, so it is something I kind of do in my spare time. But I usually update it about 3 or 4 times a year, and I'll kind of furiously add in a few things and push a couple different versions. Then you may not hear from me for a few months while I go tackle some other project. But when I do push new changes, I'll post them to the weaponized Twitter, so it's the same spelling as the YouTube channel, and there's a link actually embedded into the project here. And then the video tutorials just goes off to the same tutorials that we already saw. So there's some resources that'll help you out, but I've tried as much as possible on the main topics to make sure that the tutorials cover all of the main topics that are used in the classrooms. So a couple of schools that I know of that are using this, and I know there's one in Germany. I apologize, I can't remember the name. I'm not sure if I could pronounce it even if I did. But they emailed and said, hey, this tool's great, we use it. I know the University of Louisville uses it, and Sullivan University and a couple of other schools around this area. And so tried hard to make sure the tutorials for those items that are going to be typically covered in a class definitely have really good help in them. Now if that help wasn't enough, if you hit the toggle hints button twice, and I don't know, maybe I shouldn't tell you this since the professor's in the room, but it basically tells you exactly what to do. It literally just says, copy this and copy this and copy this, and you'll get your SQL injection to work. You don't even have to really think about it too much. But the idea with these advanced tutorials, they're only there for cross-site scripting, SQL injection, and cross-site request forgery, because those are really the big 3 that are covered in classes. And then, of course, there's some other ones that might be covered as well, but those are the main ones that everybody's pretty well, references. It'll go down into great detail about the different kinds. It may even show you how to use some tools to make the job easier. So I believe this one has a huge section on reconnaissance and scanning, and I want to say it even breaks down how to get out the information schema and walks you through basically the entire pen testing process for that vulnerability. Again, only in there for the main 3 or 4 vulnerabilities, but those advanced tutorials might be of some use. And that's a pretty good overview of the project. It's free, so feel free to download it and use it however you see fit. It's running localhost, at least it should be. I'm hoping no one puts this on the internet, so if they do, that's could be inviting some problems. But since it is running localhost, you're effectively attacking yourself, so it's legal and safe to use. You can always reset it if you need to. If you did have an idea to host it where others can get to it, because you're having a capture the flag event or something like that, one important note is the system is actually vulnerable. So a lot of the systems, the way they work is they look for you to type in a certain phrase or a certain pattern, and if the pattern is what they're looking for, then they say, oh, okay, well, you did the cross-site scripting correctly, and here's your token. But they're not actually vulnerable. They're just looking to see that you type in what they expect. This system really does have these vulnerabilities in there, so you would not want to host it, on a work computer or host it where it's remotely accessible, because it very easily could result in complete compromise of the entire system. It does have command injection vulnerabilities and some other things like that built into it that would allow compromise of the box. So just a little word of caution there, but otherwise certainly welcome to use it. Is there any questions?
We use it here.
Oh, okay.
But what I do is I basically say, here is what I want you to do, like do an SQL injection, and then they use all the help inside of the Mutillidae to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, since we don't have to wrestle with installing it, we use part2, which is where it's already installed.
Mm-hmm.
But that is one of the problems, is that if you're using it that way, you can't expose it to the internet on vulnerable OS. So it kind of makes it so that they can't use the video, so they can go look at it.
Mm-hmm. And that version that's in Metasploitable is the version that was out basically on the day that that was created, and it may not even have the videos in it anyway. So I think that's I want to say it's around like version 2.4 or something like that. The operating system I've found that's just the easiest of all, if you want to set up your own LAMP stack, is Ubuntu. Works great on that, and the LAMP stack is pretty easy to install on Ubuntu. And of course, there's other operating systems that'll work just fine on, but that one seems to be the most well-known, I guess. That was completely easy, and there was no problems with the setup and no dependency issues. If you would like a distribution where it's already installed but has a much later version, you may try the Samurai web testing framework. It has version 2.6.10, I believe, in it. And I want to say that a new version of Samurai is coming out here in maybe just a couple of weeks or so, like very soon. I think 3.11 is coming out. I took a look at it a couple of weeks ago, and it looked really nice. It's based on Kubuntu, or however you say that. And it was relatively easy to take the new version of Matilda and update it to the latest. I went ahead and actually made a YouTube video on how to do that just for Samurai, so when it comes out, you'll be able to install it real easily and just replace the existing version. So, nice thing about Samurai is that it has all the attack tools built into it, whereas of course Metasploitable is great as a remote target because it has all the vulnerable services running on it, so it's just awesome. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, certainly Kali is the standard distribution at our work. It's, matter of fact, it's the only one we use, period, because it's, in our opinion, it's the best one to use. Of course, everybody has their own opinion, but I mean, that's just what we decided for ourselves, that that's the best one. So I think that's a great way to do it, is to use Kali. All right. Yeah, it's pretty fun. All right, well, thank you very much.